Have you ever sent a text to the wrong person and felt your entire world stop? That split second when you realize what you've done? When your thumb hovers over delete but it's already too late? Most of us have been there. Maybe you sent a complaint about your boss to your boss or a personal joke to a professional group chat. Embarrassing, sure. Career-ending? Sometimes. But what if that mistake, that moment of absolute mortification, turned out to be the beginning of something you never saw coming? Clara thought her life was over when she accidentally sent a pajama photo to her CEO. We're talking about Adrien Whitmore here, the kind of man who makes billionaires nervous in boardrooms, who built an empire before most people figure out their career path, who's never been photographed smiling in any business publication, the untouchable boss everyone respects and secretly fears. And she sent him a selfie in penguin print pajamas with messy hair and zero makeup, meant for her best friend. Delivered straight to the man who controlled her entire professional future. But here's where the story gets interesting, because Adrien didn't fire her. He didn't call HR or make awkward jokes or pretend it never happened. Instead, he saw something in that unfiltered moment that changed everything, not just for Clara, but for both of them. What started as the most embarrassing mistake of her life became a journey through secret romance, corporate blackmail, devastating choices, and ultimately a love powerful enough to risk everything for. This isn't your typical office romance. This is a story about what happens when two people choose authenticity in a world that demands performance, when vulnerability becomes strength, when a pajama photo becomes the catalyst for tearing down walls both of them had spent years building. So if you've ever wondered whether one moment can truly change your entire life, whether real connection is worth the risk, or whether love can survive in the harsh light of public scrutiny, keep watching. Because Clara and Adrien's story proves that sometimes the best things in life start with the worst possible timing. You know those moments when your fingers move faster than your brain? When you're scrolling through your phone, half awake, and suddenly you've done something you can't take back? That's exactly what happened to Clara on a rainy Tuesday night in London. She'd been working late, again, hunched over her laptop in her tiny flat, trying to meet another impossible deadline. The glow of the screen was the only light in her living room, and her neck ached from hours of staring at spreadsheets that all started to blur together. Her best friend Sophie had texted her something funny about their disastrous attempt at a yoga class that morning, and Clara, exhausted but finally relaxed, snapped a quick selfie. Nothing scandalous, really. Just her in cozy pajamas covered with cartoon penguins, hair in a messy bun that had given up hours ago. A genuine smile breaking through the tiredness. The kind of photo you'd send to someone who really knows you, who wouldn't judge the dark circles under your eyes or the fact that you're eating cereal for dinner at 10 p.m. Except she didn't send it to Sophie. Her thumb slipped. The photo went straight to Adrien Whitmore, her CEO, the man who terrified half the office just by walking into a room, the guy who'd never cracked a smile in any meeting she'd attended. Clara's heart stopped. Actually stopped. She stared at her screen, watching the little delivered notification mock her with its casual certainty. For a solid minute, she couldn't breathe. Her cereal forgotten, milk getting soggy. The entire world narrowed down to those two blue check marks that confirmed her worst nightmare. Then came the panic. Real cold stomach-dropping panic. She tried to delete it, frantically tapping the screen like that would somehow reverse time. But WhatsApp doesn't work like that, does it? The damage was done. The photo was out there, in his phone, probably saved automatically to his photo roll. Oh God, what if it backed up to the cloud? What if his assistant saw it? What if the entire executive team somehow got a glimpse? Clara's mind raced through every corporate horror story she'd ever heard. People getting fired for less. Careers destroyed over misunderstood text messages. She thought about the employee handbook she'd signed on her first day, the professional conduct section she'd barely skimmed. Was there a clause about accidentally sending personal photos to your boss? There had to be, right? That night, Clara didn't sleep. Not even a little. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every possible scenario in her head. Would he think she was unprofessional? Would he fire her? God, would he think she'd done it on purpose? Some desperate attempt to get his attention? The thought made her stomach turn. She'd worked so hard to be taken seriously in that office, to prove she was more than just another junior analyst who'd eventually burn out and leave. Adrien Whitmore wasn't just any boss. He was the kind of man who commanded respect without asking for it, who built an empire before he turned 35. who never mixed business with anything remotely personal. The guy was a legend. Started with nothing, they said. Built his consulting firm from his college dorm room and turned it into one of London's most prestigious companies. He'd been featured in Forbes, quoted in the Financial Times, invited to speak at conferences where people paid thousands just to hear him talk about leadership. And now he had a photo of her in penguin print pajamas, looking like she'd just rolled out of bed, which, to be fair, she basically had. The next morning felt like walking to her own execution. Clara spent 40 minutes choosing an outfit, something professional but not like she was trying too hard. She arrived at the office early, hoping to hide in her cubicle and avoid any chance of running into him. Maybe he hadn't even looked at the photo. Maybe he just deleted it without opening it. Maybe, just maybe, she could pretend this never happened. But you can't hide from fate, can you? She was grabbing coffee in the break room when she heard his voice behind her. Deep, calm, with that slight edge that made everyone stand a little straighter. The voice that had closed million-pound deals and made grown executives sweat during presentations. "Morning, Clara." She spun around so fast she nearly dropped her mug. Adrien stood there in his perfectly tailored suit. Charcoal gray today, she noticed despite her panic. Dark hair slightly tousled like he'd been running his hands through it. Those piercing gray eyes looking right at her. And here's the thing that threw her completely off balance. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even smirking. There was something else in his expression. Something she couldn't quite read. Something that looked almost like curiosity. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. Professional, distant, like she hadn't accidentally sent him a photo of herself at her most vulnerable the night before. He nodded, grabbed his own coffee, black, no sugar. She found herself noting him and walked away. That was it. No mention of the photo. No embarrassing confrontation. No HR summons, nothing. Clara should have felt relieved, right? Should have been grateful he was being professional about the whole thing. But instead, she felt more confused than ever. The weird part started in the afternoon. During the quarterly review meeting, Clara sat in her usual spot toward the back taking notes while the executives discussed projections and strategies. She wasn't expecting to be noticed, no, she never was. She was part of the furniture, the reliable worker bee who showed up, did her job well, and went home without making waves. That's how you survived in places like this. But then Adrien started talking about authenticity and brand messaging, and his eyes found hers across the crowded conference room. Not a quick glance. A real look, the kind that made her forget how to breathe properly. "People connect with what's real," he said, his gaze steady on her. Unwavering. Not the polished, filtered version we think they want to see. Sometimes it's the unguarded moments, the honest ones, that matter most. Those are the moments that build genuine trust. Clara's pen froze on her notepad. The air in the room felt suddenly thin. Was he? No, he couldn't be. That was just a coincidence, right? He was talking about marketing strategy, not about her stupid photo. But her colleague Marcus leaned over and whispered, "Why's the boss staring at you?" And that's when Clara realized this wasn't her imagination. This was happening. Over the next few days, it kept happening. Little things that could have been nothing but felt like everything. Adrien would walk past her desk and pause just for a second, as if he wanted to say something but didn't. In meetings, he'd ask for her opinion specifically, something he'd never done before. "Clara, what's your take on this?" he'd say, and suddenly 20 pairs of eyes would turn to her, wondering when she'd become someone whose opinion the CEO valued. Once, she caught him looking at his phone with the faintest hint of a smile, not his usual sharp business smile, but something softer, more real. Her heart did this stupid flip because what if he was looking at that photo? What if every time he saw it, he thought about her not as Clara the analyst, but as just Clara? The office gossip mill started churning. People noticed the CEO was acting differently, though no one could quite put their finger on why. Sophie cornered Clara in the bathroom on Thursday, eyes wide with curiosity and concern. "Okay, spill. What's going on with you and Whitmore? And don't say nothing because I've worked here for 3 years and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." "Nothing," Clara insisted, maybe too quickly. "There's literally nothing going on. He's my boss." That's it, but that wasn't entirely true, was it? Because something had shifted. Something fundamental and terrifying. Clara found herself thinking about him during her lunch break, wondering what he was like when he wasn't being the untouchable CEO. She noticed things she'd never paid attention to before. The way he rolled up his sleeves when he was working through a problem, revealing strong forearms and a watch that probably cost more than her car. The slight furrow in his brow when he was concentrating, like he was trying to solve a puzzle only he could see. The rare moments when his guard dropped and you could see he was just as tired as everyone else, just as human beneath all that success. Friday afternoon, Clara was packing up her things when her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number made her pulse quicken. Probably spam, she told herself. But when she opened it, her breath caught in her throat. Your smile was genuine. That's rare. AW, she must have read those 7 words 100 times. Adrien Whitmore, the man who probably had a team managing his communications, had texted her personally. And not about work. Not about some forgotten report or upcoming deadline. About her smile. About authenticity. About something that felt dangerously, thrillingly personal. Clara's hand shook as she typed back. Delete. Retype. Delete again. What do you say to that? How do you respond to your CEO acknowledging a moment of vulnerability without making it weird, without crossing lines that could never be uncrossed? Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, she settled on something simple and honest. So was this conversation. She hit send before she could overthink it. Before her rational brain could stop her impulsive heart. The 3 dots appeared almost immediately, then disappeared. Then appeared again. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. Whatever was happening here, whatever this was becoming, it felt like standing at the edge of something vast and terrifying and thrilling all at once. His response came through just as she was leaving the building. Maybe we should have more of them. And just like that, everything changed. The accidental photo wasn't a mistake anymore. It was a door opening to something neither of them had planned for. Clara walked out into the London evening, the city lights blurring around her. Rain just starting to fall, and for the first time in years she felt truly seen. Not as an employee, not as another face in the corporate machine, but as herself. Messy bun, penguin pajamas, genuine smile and all. But here's what Clara didn't know yet. Being seen by Adrien Whitmore came with complications she couldn't begin to imagine. Because in their world, with their positions, with the rules and hierarchies and power dynamics that governed everything, authentic connection wasn't just rare, it was dangerous. There's something about secrets that makes them feel more real than anything spoken out loud. Clara learned that over the next week as text messages with Adrien became her favorite part of every day. They weren't frequent. He wasn't the type to spam her phone. But when they came, they mattered. Late at night, when the rest of the world had gone quiet, her phone would light up with his name and suddenly she wasn't tired anymore. They talked about everything except work. Books they'd loved as kids, places they wanted to visit but never had time for, the weight of expectations that came with being good at what you do. Adrien told her about growing up in a council estate in Manchester, how he'd worn the same shoes for 3 years because his mum couldn't afford new ones, how that hunger had driven him to build something that could never be taken away. Clara shared her own story, a small town in Yorkshire, parents who'd sacrificed everything to send her to university, the crushing fear that she'd disappoint them if she didn't succeed. But text messages can only carry so much weight before they start to feel like shadows of real conversation. Clara found herself reading between the lines, wondering what his voice would sound like saying these things, whether his eyes would soften when he talked about his mother the way they did in meetings when someone mentioned genuine struggle. The shift happened during a Monday morning meeting. The executive team was reviewing a new client pitch and tensions were running high. The marketing director had presented a campaign that felt safe, polished, sterile. Adrien listened without expression, fingers steepled under his chin, and Clara could tell he hated it even before he spoke. "It's technically perfect," he said finally, his voice cutting through the room's nervous energy, "and it'll accomplish exactly nothing. People don't buy products. They buy feelings, connections, stories that reflect something true about themselves." He paused, and his eyes found Clara's across the table. This time she didn't look away. Emotion is what drives real decisions, not the manufactured kind we put in commercials, but the authentic, sometimes messy kind that makes us human, the kind that reminds us we're not alone in what we feel. The room went silent. Several people shifted uncomfortably, unsure if they'd just witnessed a professional insight or something far more personal. Marcus shot Clara a look that said he definitely thought it was the latter. But she couldn't focus on any of that because Adrien was still looking at her, and the message in his gaze was clear. I'm talking to you. Only you. The meeting ended, people scattered, and Clara was gathering her notes when her phone buzzed. Adrien's message was simple but sent her pulse racing. Dinner tonight? Somewhere quiet. We need to talk properly. She should have said no, should have reminded herself about professional boundaries, about the power imbalance, about the 100 reasons why this was a terrible idea. Instead, she typed back, "Where?" His response came with an address near the Thames, a small Italian place she'd never heard of. 8 o'clock. And Clara, come as yourself. She spent the entire afternoon distracted, accomplishing nothing useful, her mind spinning through what this meant. Sophie noticed immediately during their lunch break, cornering her by the coffee machine with knowing eyes. You're meeting him, aren't you? Outside of work. Clara opened her mouth to deny it, then closed it again. What was the point? Sophie knew her too well. Is that crazy? Clara asked quietly. Like professionally suicidal crazy? Sophie considered this, really thought about it instead of jumping to judgment. That's what Clara loved about her. She didn't deal in simple answers. Probably, Sophie admitted. But I've also seen the way you light up when you talk about him. Not just as your boss, but as a person. When's the last time anyone made you feel like that? When's the last time you took a risk on something that mattered? Clara didn't have an answer for that. She'd spent so long playing it safe, being the good employee, the reliable one who never caused problems. Maybe it was time to see what happened when she stopped hiding. That evening, Clara stood outside the restaurant at exactly 8 o'clock, her heart hammering so hard she thought pedestrians could probably hear it. The place was tucked away on a quiet street, warm light spilling from windows covered with ivy. Nothing fancy, nothing that screamed CEO expense account, just a spot where two people could talk without the world watching. Adrien was already there, sitting at a corner table, and seeing him out of context felt surreal. No suit jacket, just a dark blue shirt with rolled sleeves, looking more human than she'd ever seen him. When he spotted her, he actually stood, like this was a real date, and something in Clara's chest tightened. You found it, he said, and there was relief in his voice, like maybe he'd worried she wouldn't show. Google Maps and I are very close friends, Clara replied, and he laughed. Actually laughed. She'd never heard him laugh before, and the sound was warmer than she'd imagined, more genuine. They ordered wine neither of them really wanted and food they barely touched because suddenly there was so much to say and no idea where to start. The small talk lasted maybe 5 minutes before Adrien leaned back in his chair and just looked at her. Really looked, in a way that made her feel transparent and safe at the same time. I need to be honest with you, he said. That photo you sent, it didn't bother me. It did the opposite. For the first time in I don't know how long, I saw someone being real in a world that demands we perform constantly, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. About you, Clara's breath caught. The restaurant noise faded into background static. I was mortified, she admitted. I thought you'd think I was unprofessional or trying to. I know what you thought, he interrupted gently. But Clara, do you have any idea how exhausting it is to be untouchable? To have everyone treat you like you're made of something different, something separate from normal human emotion? That photo reminded me I'm not the only one who feels tired and real and imperfect behind all the polish. She wanted to tell him she understood, that she'd spent years watching him from a distance thinking he had it all figured out, never imagining he might feel the same weight she did. But words felt inadequate, so instead she reached across the table and did something brave. She took his hand. His fingers closed around hers immediately, warm and certain, and just like that, the careful distance they'd been maintaining collapsed. They talked for hours, about the loneliness that comes with success nobody sees, about family and guilt and the fear that you'll never be enough no matter how hard you work. Adrien told her about panic attacks in his office after big deals, about the therapist he saw twice a week and never mentioned to anyone. Clara shared her own anxieties, the imposter syndrome that whispered she didn't belong, the nights she cried in her flat wondering if she'd made the right choices. I thought CEOs weren't allowed to be human, Clara said at one point. Wine making her brave, we're not, Adrien replied with a sad smile. That's the problem. We're supposed to be machines that make money and strategic decisions, but I'm tired of pretending, especially with you. The check came eventually, though neither of them had noticed the restaurant emptying around them, Outside, the Thames reflected city lights in rippling patterns. And they walked without direction, just wanting to stretch the night longer. "This is dangerous," Clara said finally, voicing what they both knew. "You're my boss. People will talk." "There are rules." "I know," Adrien said, stopping to face her. The streetlight caught his features, highlighting the intensity in his eyes. "I've spent 3 days listing every reason this is a bad idea. But Clara, I'm 37 years old and I've built an empire, but I've never felt connected to another person the way I do when I'm talking to you. So yes, it's dangerous, but maybe some things are worth the risk." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture so tender it made her ache. "I'm not asking you to decide everything tonight. I'm just asking if you feel this too." "If I'm not imagining it." "You're not imagining it," Clara whispered. "I feel it. I'm just scared." "Good," he said softly. "If you weren't scared, it wouldn't mean anything." They stood there by the river, the city moving around them, both knowing they'd just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The practical concerns would come flooding back tomorrow. The office dynamics, the potential consequences, the scrutiny they'd face. But right now, in this moment stolen from their carefully constructed professional lives, they were just two people who'd found something rare. Clara's phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. "Still alive? Need rescue?" She smiled and typed back, "Alive. More than alive." When Adrien walked her to her car, he didn't kiss her. Not yet, that would come later. Instead, he held her hand one more time and said, "Whatever happens next, I want you to know I see you. The real you, and she's remarkable." Clara drove home with her heart full of something she couldn't quite name. Hope, maybe, or possibility. Or the terrifying, exhilarating certainty that her life had just changed in ways she couldn't predict or control. But as she'd soon discover, being seen by Adrien Whitmore came with shadows she hadn't anticipated. Because in a world built on power and perception, two people choosing authenticity over caution doesn't just create connection, it creates targets. Secrets have a shelf life. That's what Clara's grandmother used to say, though back then Clara thought she was talking about preserving jam, not navigating an impossible romance with her CEO. But as days turned into weeks, she understood exactly what that warning meant. Every secret eventually demands to be told, and the longer you keep it, the more explosive it becomes when it finally breaks free. The first few weeks felt like living in two different worlds. During the day, Clara was the consummate professional, arriving early, leaving late, keeping her head down and her work impeccable. In meetings, she and Adrien maintained careful distance, their interactions so formally polite that Marcus joked she'd somehow offended the boss and was now being frozen out. If only he knew the truth was exactly the opposite. But when the office emptied and the city lights flickered on, that's when their real life began. Text messages that started innocent and drifted into territory that made Clara's heart race. Late-night phone calls where they talked until 3 a.m. about everything and nothing. Stolen moments in his car parked in anonymous spots around London. Windows fogged up while they kissed like teenagers who'd just discovered what want feels like. "This is insane," Clara whispered one night. Her fingers tangled in Adrien's hair, both of them squeezed into the back seat of his Range Rover like they didn't have perfectly good flats to go to. But going to his place felt too real, too much like admitting this was more than just an impulsive attraction they'd eventually grow out of. "Completely insane," Adrien agreed, kissing her neck in a way that made coherent thought impossible. "We should stop. Be sensible adults. Follow the rules." "We absolutely should," Clara said, pulling him closer instead of pushing him away. They didn't stop. How could they? Clara had spent her entire adult life being careful, measuring every decision against potential consequences, playing it safe. But Adrien made her want to be reckless. He saw parts of her she'd kept hidden. The dreamer who'd given up on dreams. The romantic who'd convinced herself romance was for other people. The woman who'd forgotten she was allowed to want things just because they made her happy. The sneaking around became an art form. They learned the rhythms of the office, the blind spots in the security cameras, the times when everyone would be too busy to notice if they both happened to be away from their desks. Adrien would text her coordinates, a park bench, a quiet cafe 3 neighborhoods over, once a museum exhibit they'd talked about during a 2 a.m. phone call. They'd meet like spies, pretend to be strangers who just happened to sit next to each other, and talk in low voices about real things while the rest of the world rushed past, oblivious, but keeping that kind of secret takes a toll. Clara started noticing the weight of it in small ways. The hesitation before she laughed at one of Adrien's jokes in a meeting, calculating whether it would seem too familiar. The careful choreography of arriving and leaving separately, never at the same time, never giving anyone a reason to connect them. The exhausting mental math of keeping their stories straight when colleagues asked about weekend plans. "You're different lately," Sophie said one afternoon, studying Clara over lunch. "You seem happier but also tense, like you're waiting for something to go wrong." Clara's stomach twisted. Sophie knew her too well. "Just work stress," she lied, hating how easily the dishonesty came now. "Big project coming up," but Sophie wasn't buying it. "Clara, I'm your best friend. I know when you're hiding something. And I know that look. That's not work stress. That's relationship stress." For a terrifying moment, Clara almost told her everything. Almost spilled about the late-night drives, the whispered confessions, the way Adrien looked at her like she was the only real thing in his carefully constructed world. But fear locked the words in her throat. Because once you tell one person, it stops being your secret. It becomes something that can spread, grow, destroy. "There's nothing to tell," Clara said firmly, and Sophie's face fell with obvious hurt. The lies were piling up, and Clara could feel herself getting buried under them. Meanwhile, Adrien was fighting his own battles. Board meetings where he had to advocate for policies he knew would affect Clara's department, maintaining the cold professional distance that made people respect him, never letting his mask slip even when all he wanted was to text her something stupid that would make her laugh. He was used to compartmentalizing. You don't build a company without learning to separate business from personal. But this was different. This was harder. "You're distracted," his business partner Richard noted after a presentation to potential investors. "That's not like you." "Everything okay?" "Fine," Adrien said, which was true and completely false at the same time. Everything was fine when he was with Clara. Everything else felt like going through motions. The breaking point came on a Thursday. Clara was working late, actually working, not using it as cover, when Adrien appeared at her desk. The office was mostly empty, just the hum of computers and the distant sound of the cleaning crew starting their rounds. He shouldn't have come to her. They'd agreed not to take risks like this, but sometimes need override sense. "Hey," he said softly, and just that one word made Clara's defenses crumble. "Hey yourself," she replied, saving her document and turning to face him. He looked exhausted, tie loosened, that carefully maintained composure starting to crack. "I had a terrible day," he admitted. "Client meeting went badly. The board is pushing back on expansion plans, and all I could think about was how much I wanted to talk to you about it." Really talk, not in code or through text that might be seen. Clara's heart broke a little. "Come here," she said, checking that they were alone before standing and wrapping her arms around him. He held her tight, face buried in her hair, and for a moment they weren't CEO and analyst. They were just two people who'd found something precious in an impossible situation. "I want to take you to dinner tomorrow," Adrien said. "A real dinner at a real restaurant where we don't have to hide." Clara pulled back to look at him. "Adrien, you know we can't. If someone sees us—" "I know the risks," he interrupted. "I've spent weeks calculating them. But Clara, I'm tired of treating this like something shameful. You're not something I need to hide. You're—" He paused, struggling with words, and she'd never seen him look so vulnerable. "You're the best thing that's happened to me in years, and I hate that we have to act like you're not." She wanted to say yes. God, she wanted to. But the practical part of her brain, the part that had kept her safe and employed and respectable, was screaming warnings. "What about my job?" she asked. "What about people thinking I'm sleeping my way to the top? What about the scrutiny, the gossip, the way everything I accomplish will be questioned?" "I know," Adrien said, his thumb brushing her cheek. "I know what I'm asking you to risk. But I'm asking anyway. Because hiding doesn't protect us, and it just makes us invisible to each other when we're not alone." They stood there in her cubicle, office lights humming overhead, both knowing this conversation was about more than just dinner. It was about whether they were brave enough to claim something real in a world that punished authenticity. Clara's phone buzzed. A text from Sophie. "Movie tomorrow night? Or are you working late again?" The guilt hit like a punch. She'd been pulling away from her best friend, canceling plans, offering excuses that grew thinner each time, all to protect a secret that was starting to feel more like a prison than a sanctuary. "I need to think about it," Clara said finally. "Can we talk tomorrow?" Adrien nodded, understanding even if he was disappointed. He kissed her forehead, a gesture so tender it made her ache, and left without another word. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed running scenarios, weighing consequences, trying to calculate the cost of honesty against the price of hiding. But math doesn't work on matters of the heart, does it? You can't equation your way out of wanting something that scares you. Her phone lit up at 2 a.m. Adrien's message was simple. "Whatever you decide, I'm here. No pressure. Just know that you're worth every risk to me." Clara read those words a dozen times, feeling them settle into the anxious spaces in her chest. Maybe courage wasn't about being unafraid. Maybe it was about being terrified and choosing to move forward anyway. She typed back, "Tomorrow night. A real dinner. Let's see what happens when we stop hiding." His response was immediate, a single heart emoji which somehow said more than paragraphs could have. Clara rolled over, trying to calm her racing heart. She'd just agreed to something that could change everything: her career, her reputation, her carefully maintained stability. But as she finally drifted toward sleep, one thought kept circling back. What's the point of safety if you're not actually living? Tomorrow they'd find out if their connection was strong enough to survive sunlight. But what neither of them knew yet was that someone had already noticed their careful dance around each other, and that someone wasn't planning to stay quiet much longer. You ever notice how the worst moments of your life tend to start with the most ordinary details? Like how you were just reaching for your coffee, or tying your shoes, or in Clara's case, laughing at something Adrien said in the parking garage at 7:30 on a Friday morning. That's when everything shattered. They'd been so careful, months of navigating their relationship like soldiers crossing a minefield, every step measured, every interaction calculated. But that morning, their dinner the night before still glowing warm in Clara's chest, they'd let their guard down for exactly 45 seconds. Adrien had walked her to her car like he'd done a dozen times before, but this time he'd made her laugh. Really laugh. The kind that comes from your stomach and lights up your whole face. And maybe his hand lingered on her arm a beat too long. Maybe they stood a little too close, their body language screaming what their words never said in public. That's all it took. 45 seconds of being human. Edward Thornton, the company's vice president and Adrien's supposed right-hand man, saw everything from his car 2 rows over. Clara noticed him first, the way you notice a predator watching from the shadows. Her laughter died in her throat, and Adrien turned to follow her gaze. Their eyes met Edward's through the windshield, and Clara watched something cold and calculating slide across his face. Not surprise, not shock, something worse, an opportunity. "How long has he been sitting there?" Clara whispered, her mouth suddenly dry. "Long enough," Adrien said quietly, his jaw tight. "Get to your desk. Act normal. I'll handle this. But you can't handle a man like Edward Thornton." Clara would learn that soon enough. Edward had been with the company since year 2, back when it was just Adrien and 3 other people working out of a cramped office that smelled like instant coffee and desperation. He'd helped build the empire, stood beside Adrien through hostile takeovers and boardroom battles, earned his position through loyalty and ruthless efficiency. But somewhere along the way, ambition had curdled into resentment. He'd spent years in Adrien's shadow, watching the younger man collect accolades while Edward did the dirty work nobody wanted to acknowledge. And now, he had leverage. Clara tried to focus on work, but her hands shook every time she touched her keyboard. She kept replaying that moment, Edward's expression, the way his lips had curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Around 10 a.m., she watched through the glass conference room walls as Edward and Adrien had what looked like a very intense conversation. Adrien's posture was rigid, controlled, but Clara knew him well enough now to see the fury barely contained beneath the surface. The meeting lasted 17 minutes. When it ended, Adrien didn't look her way. That's how she knew it was bad. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Cute couple. Wonder what HR would think. Or the board. Or that nosy friend of yours. Sophie, is it?" Clara's blood turned to ice. Edward. He was threatening not just her job, but everyone around her. She wanted to throw up. Another text. "Don't worry. I'm reasonable. We'll talk soon about how this can stay between us." That's what blackmail looks like in the modern world. Not dramatic confrontations in dark alleys, but texts sent from executive offices while everyone pretends everything's normal. Adrien didn't call her that night. Or text. For the first time in months, her phone stayed dark and silent, and the absence felt like drowning. Clara paced her flat until 2 a.m., running scenarios, each one worse than the last. What did Edward want? Money? Power? Adrien's position? Or did he just want to watch them suffer because he could? The answer came Monday morning. Clara arrived to find her desk had been moved, not to a better location, but to a corner near the supply closet, far from any windows or the main flow of traffic. A demotion without the official paperwork. When she tried to log into her computer, half her project access had been revoked. It was subtle, the kind of professional humiliation that happens gradually enough that you can't quite point to any single action as proof. Sophie found her sitting there, staring at her relocated desk with numb disbelief. What the hell happened? Did you piss someone off? Clara couldn't answer. Couldn't explain that she was being systematically erased from the company she'd given 3 years of her life to. And all because she'd fallen for the wrong person. Talk to me, Sophie pressed, genuine concern in her eyes. Please, whatever's going on, you don't have to handle it alone. But Clara did have to handle it alone. Because telling Sophie meant putting her at risk too, and she'd already cost enough people enough. It's fine, Clara lied, the words tasting like ash. Just some reorganization. No big deal. The real blow came Wednesday. Clara was called to a meeting in the main conference room, the nice one they used for important clients. Edward was there, sitting at the head of the table like he owned it. Adrien sat beside him, and the look on his face made Clara's heart crack. He looked defeated in a way she'd never seen, like someone had taken everything that made him powerful and ground it to dust. Clara, please sit, Edward said, his voice smooth as poison. We need to discuss your future with the company. She sat because her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. Adrien wouldn't meet her eyes. We've noticed some performance concerns lately, Edward continued, pulling out a folder thick with papers. Missed deadlines, errors in reports, general distraction. Nothing fireable yet, but concerning enough that we think a change might be beneficial for everyone. Every word was a lie, and they all knew it. Clara's performance had been flawless. This was theater, a public execution disguised as corporate restructuring. We're prepared to offer you a very generous severance package, Edward said, sliding papers across the table. 6 months salary, excellent references, no negative marks on your record. All you have to do is resign. Effective immediately. Clara finally looked at Adrien. Say something, she wanted to scream. Fight for me. Fight for us. But he sat there silent, and his silence was louder than any words could have been. What's the alternative? Clara asked, proud that her voice didn't shake. Edward's smile widened. The alternative is we conduct a thorough investigation into employee conduct violations, professional relationship policies, and potential breaches of contract. That investigation would be extensive, public, and damaging to everyone involved. Your call, there it was. The ultimatum. Leave quietly or watch everything burn. Can I have a moment alone with Mr. Whitmore? Clara asked. I don't think that's appropriate given, Edward started, but Adrien cut him off. Give us 5 minutes. It was the first thing he'd said since Clara entered the room, and his voice was raw with barely suppressed emotion. Edward left, but not before shooting them both a look that said he'd won, and they all knew it. The second the door closed, Adrien was out of his chair. Clara, I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. He's got evidence. Photos, texts, statements from the parking garage security guard. He's been building a case for weeks. Then let him release it, Clara said, surprised by her own courage. Let people know. We haven't done anything wrong. You haven't, Adrien said bitterly. But I have. I'm your boss. I have power over your career, your salary, your future. That makes this inappropriate no matter how we feel about each other. The board will see it as a massive liability. They'll force me out and destroy you in the process. Edward knows that. He's been waiting for this. So your solution is to what? Just let him win? Throw me away to save yourself? The accusation hung between them, sharp and cutting. Adrien flinched like she'd slapped him. I'm trying to protect you, he said. If this goes public, you'll never work in this industry again. Every accomplishment will be questioned. Every success attributed to our relationship. I won't let that happen to you. I won't let my mistakes destroy your future. That's not your choice to make, Clara shot back, tears burning her eyes now. I'm not some damsel who needs protecting. I'm a grown woman who made her own decisions. If there are consequences, I'll face them. No, Adrien said firmly. You won't. Take the severance. Leave with your reputation intact. Find something better. Somewhere you'll be valued for your actual work. And Clara, his voice broke. Forget about me. Move on, be happy. Because I clearly can't give you anything but complications and pain. It was the ultimate act of self-sacrifice disguised as rejection, and Clara saw right through it. But she also saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of impossible choices. The man who'd built everything himself now being forced to choose between his company and his heart. Is that really what you want? She asked quietly. For me to just walk away? Pretend none of this mattered? Adrien looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw everything he wasn't saying. The love, the regret, the fury at a system that punished authenticity and rewarded manipulation. What I want doesn't matter anymore, he said. This is what has to happen. Clara picked up the severance papers with shaking hands. You're a coward, she said, and the words were designed to hurt because she needed him to feel even a fraction of what she was feeling. You built an empire, but you couldn't fight for one person who actually mattered. Congratulations, Adrien. Edward wins, you lose, and I hope it was worth it. She signed the papers right there, her signature a slash of ink that felt like signing away more than just a job. Then she stood, held her head high, and walked out of that conference room without looking back. Sophie was waiting by Clara's desk, concern etched across her face. What happened? Are you okay? I quit, Clara said flatly. Or was fired. Does it matter? I'm leaving. What? Why, Clara talked to me. But Clara couldn't, not yet. Not while everything still felt too raw. She packed her desk in silence. Personal photos, the coffee mug Sophie had given her last Christmas, the small succulent she'd managed not to kill. 3 years of her life fit into one cardboard box. As she walked to her car for the last time, she passed Adrien's office. Through the glass, she could see him standing at his window, hands in his pockets, looking out at the city he'd conquered while losing everything that actually mattered. Their eyes met for one brief moment, and the pain in his expression almost made her turn back. Almost. Instead, Clara got in her car and drove away from the company. The job, the man she'd been foolish enough to love. She drove until the tears came too hard to see the road, until she had to pull over and let herself break completely. Her phone buzzed. A text from Adrien. I will fix this. I promise. Just give me time. But promises made under duress rarely survive the weight of reality. And as Clara sat in her car watching London rush past her windows, she wondered if some breaks were too fundamental to ever truly heal. Back in his office, Adrien stared at his phone, at Clara's lack of response, and felt something inside him calcify into pure rage. Edward thought he'd won. Thought fear and manipulation could make people fall in line forever. He had no idea what was coming. Sometimes the people we think we know best are the ones capable of surprising us most. Sophie proved that 3 days after Clara left the company. She showed up at Clara's flat with Thai food, 2 bottles of wine, and a look that said she wasn't leaving until they had a real conversation. Talk, Sophie demanded, setting the food on Clara's coffee table. And don't give me any corporate restructuring nonsense. I've seen you come to work hungover, stressed, exhausted. I've never seen you look destroyed like you did when you left. So talk, and Clara did. She told her everything. The accidental photo, the secret messages, the stolen moments falling for Adrien despite knowing better. Edward's blackmail, the impossible choice. She cried through half of it, laughed bitterly through the other half, and by the end felt emptied out in a way that was almost relief. Sophie listened without interrupting, processing it all with the analytical mind that made her so good at her job. When Clara finally finished, Sophie took a long drink of wine and said something Clara wasn't expecting. He's protecting you wrong. What? Adrien. He thinks pushing you away protects you, but all it does is let Edward win and make you both miserable. That's not protection. That's cowardice dressed up as sacrifice. The words hit Clara hard because they were exactly what she'd been thinking, but was too hurt to articulate. So what am I supposed to do? Show up at his office and demand he risk everything for me? No, Sophie said thoughtfully. But maybe someone needs to remind him that real courage isn't playing it safe. It's fighting for what matters even when the cost is high. That night, Sophie did something remarkable. She went to Adrien's building. Not to the office, but to his private residence that she'd tracked down through corporate records and some creative LinkedIn stalking. She talked her way past the doorman with sheer determination and ended up in Adrien's penthouse living room, where he answered the door looking like he hadn't slept in days. "You're Sophie," he said, recognizing her from office functions. "Clara's friend. And you're the guy breaking my best friend's heart while calling it protection?" Sophie shot back. "Can I come in, or are we having this conversation in the hallway?" Adrien stepped aside, too tired to argue. His apartment was immaculate and soulless. Expensive furniture that looked like it came from a catalog, barely lived in, no personal touches. It reminded Sophie of a hotel room, a man who'd built everything but forgotten to build a life. "Clara told you," Adrien said. "It wasn't a question. She did. And before you get all worried about confidentiality, she told me because she's falling apart and needed someone to catch her. That's what friends do." Sophie moved into his space with the confidence of someone who had nothing to lose. "Now let me tell you what I see. I see a man who's so used to being in control that he'd rather sacrifice his own happiness than risk looking vulnerable. I see someone who thinks protecting Clara means making decisions for her instead of with her. And I see a coward hiding behind noble intentions." Adrien's jaw tightened. "You have no idea what's at stake, don't I? I work there too. I know Edward, know his type. He's a bully who only has power because people are too scared to call him out, and you're playing right into his hands." Sophie pulled out her phone, showing him something that made his eyes narrow. "I've been digging. Employee complaints filed against Edward over the years, all mysteriously dismissed. Expense reports that don't quite add up. Conflicts of interest with vendors that benefit him personally. The man's not untouchable. He's just been untouched because everyone's too afraid to look closely. How did you— I'm good at my job, and I have friends in accounting who also think Edward's a creep," Sophie interrupted. "The point is, you have ammunition if you're brave enough to use it. But you're so focused on protecting Clara's reputation that you're willing to let a corrupt vice president run your company and destroy what you two have. That's not love, Adrien. That's fear." Her words landed like punches. Adrien sat down heavily, running his hands through his hair. "If I go public with our relationship, Clara becomes a target. Every accomplishment questioned, every promotion scrutinized. I won't do that to her." "Then ask her what she wants instead of deciding for her," Sophie said more gently. "Clara's stronger than you think. She doesn't need you to be her hero. She needs you to be her partner, someone willing to stand beside her, not in front of her." Sophie left after that, but her words stayed. They circled Adrien's mind through another sleepless night, mixing with his own regrets and the weight of choices made in fear rather than courage. By dawn, something had crystallized in his chest, and the clarity he'd been avoiding because it required him to be vulnerable in ways that terrified him more than any boardroom battle ever had. He picked up his phone and called Clara. It rang 4 times before she answered, her voice heavy with sleep and wariness. "It's 6 in the morning, Adrien. What do you want?" "You," he said simply. "I want you. Not in secret, not in the shadows, not in some compartmentalized part of my life. I want you loud and public and permanent. And I'm sorry it took me this long to figure out that protecting you means standing with you, not pushing you away." Silence on the other end. Then quietly, "What changed?" "Your friend Sophie broke into my apartment and called me a coward," Adrien admitted with a rough laugh. "She was right. I've been so afraid of what people would think, of the consequences of not being in control, that I forgot the only thing that actually matters. You matter, Clara, we matter, and I'm done letting fear decide my life." "Adrien, Edward still has leverage. Nothing's changed. Everything's changed," he countered, "because I'm not hiding anymore. I'm going to the board today. I'm telling them about us, about Edward's blackmail, about everything. And then I'm going to ask you something I should have asked weeks ago." "What?" Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "Marry me." The words fell into the space between them, impossible and perfect. Clara made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob or both. "You're proposing to me over the phone at 6 in the morning after you fired me?" "I am proposing before I lose my nerve," Adrien said. "Because I've built a company and made millions and earned respect from people who don't matter. But I've never been as terrified as I am right now asking you to take a chance on us." So yes, terrible timing, worse execution, but Clara, marry me. Choose this mess. Choose me. She should have said no. Should have made him work for it. Earn back her trust. Prove he wouldn't run when things got hard again. But something in his voice, the raw vulnerability, the determination, the love he wasn't hiding anymore, broke through her defenses. Ask me again in person, she said. And Adrien, bring a ring this time. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. That afternoon, Clara got a text from Sophie. Turn on the company live stream. Board meeting going public. Grab popcorn. Clara's hands shook as she pulled up the company's internal portal. The quarterly board meeting was streaming live, unusual but not unprecedented for major announcements. Adrien stood at the head of the conference table, Edward visible at his right. The board members arranged like judges at a trial. Before we begin regular business, Adrien started, his voice steady and clear. I have something to address. Many of you are aware of recent personnel changes, specifically the resignation of one of our junior analysts. What you don't know is that resignation was coerced through blackmail by someone in this room. The murmur that rippled through the board was audible even through Clara's laptop speakers. Edward's face went carefully blank, but his eyes betrayed fury. Adrien continued, laying it out methodically. His relationship with Clara, honest, consensual, handled privately to avoid office complications. Edward discovering them and using that information as leverage. The threats, the forced resignation, the systematic professional destruction. And then beautifully the turn. What Edward didn't know is that while he was focused on my personal life, I was investigating his professional conduct. Adrien pulled up a presentation, numbers and documents filling the screen, 3 years of questionable vendor relationships, kickbacks disguised as consulting fees, conflicts of interest that have cost this company roughly £2 million, and multiple HR complaints swept under the rug because he knew where bodies were buried. The room exploded. Board members shouting questions, Edward on his feet, legal counsel scrambling. Clara watched it unfold with her heart in her throat, barely able to process what she was seeing. Adrien wasn't just defending their relationship. He was burning down the old system that allowed people like Edward to thrive. I'm prepared to accept whatever consequences the board decides are appropriate for my relationship with Clara, Adrien said over the chaos. But I won't apologize for it. She's remarkable, our relationship is genuine. And I'm done pretending otherwise to satisfy people who would rather we perform propriety than practice integrity. Then he looked directly at the camera, and Clara knew he was looking at her. Clara, if you're watching this, I meant what I said this morning. Every word. Come to my office at 6. I'll be waiting. The meeting dissolved into parliamentary procedure after that, but Clara had already stopped watching. She was digging through her closet for something to wear, her hands still shaking but now with anticipation rather than fear. Her phone exploded with texts, Sophie with a string of celebration emojis, former colleagues reaching out with support. Even her mother somehow having heard the news already. At 6 p.m. exactly, Clara walked into Adrien's office building for the first time since she'd left in disgrace. The security guard smiled and waved her through without question. The elevator ride felt eternal. And when the doors opened on the executive floor, Adrien was standing there waiting. He looked exhausted and exhilarated and terrified all at once. In his hand was a small velvet box. The board accepted Edward's resignation and opened a full investigation, he said without preamble. I've been censured for failing to disclose our relationship appropriately, but they're letting me stay on with conditions. And Clara, none of that matters compared to this. He dropped to one knee right there in the hallway and Clara's breath caught. I'm not good at vulnerability. I'm not good at asking for help or admitting when I'm scared. But you make me want to be better at all of it. Marry me. Not because it's practical or strategic or makes sense to anyone else. Marry me because when I'm with you, I finally understand what people mean when they talk about home. Clara looked down at this man who'd torn apart his careful control to fight for them, who'd chosen courage over comfort, who'd finally understood that love isn't about protection, it's about partnership. Yes, she said, pulling him to his feet. But we're doing premarital counseling, because we clearly need to work on communication. He laughed and kissed her right there in the hallway where anyone could see, and it felt like breathing for the first time in weeks. Turns out, Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop hiding and start living, even when it's messy, even when it's complicated. Especially then. Here's what nobody tells you about happy endings, Rear. They're not actually endings at all. They're beginnings disguised as conclusions, and beginnings are messy and complicated and require work that fairy tales never prepare you for. Clara learned that truth 6 months into marriage, standing in their kitchen at 2 a.m, having their first real fight. "You can't just make decisions without consulting me," she said, voice tight with frustration. "This affects both of us, Adrien. We're supposed to be partners." He'd accepted a speaking engagement in Singapore, 2 weeks, major industry conference, incredible opportunity. He'd also accepted it without asking if those dates worked for Clara, who'd just landed a position at a rival consulting firm and had her own commitments to navigate. "I didn't think it would be a problem," Adrien said, which was exactly the wrong thing to say, and they both knew it. "That's the issue. You didn't think. You just assumed, like you're still operating solo instead of as part of a team." Clara set down her tea with more force than necessary. "I left my job, rebuilt my career from scratch, dealt with the gossip and scrutiny of being your wife. The least you can do is check your calendar with me before committing to international travel." The words hung between them, sharp with resentment that had been building in small ways neither had addressed. "Because that's how it works, right? You think getting married solves everything, but really it just gives you a safe space to have the fights you've been avoiding." Adrien was quiet for a long moment. Then, instead of getting defensive, he did something that still surprised Clara even after months together. He listened. "You're right," he said simply. "I'm still learning how to not be alone in my decisions. That's not an excuse, just context. I'm sorry. I'll call them tomorrow and see if we can shift the dates or if you want to come with me." "I can't," Clara interrupted. "I have client presentations that week. But the point isn't Singapore. The point is us figuring out how to actually build a life together, instead of just running parallel lives that occasionally intersect." They talked until dawn, working through not just the immediate problem, but the patterns underneath it. Adrien's tendency to compartmentalize, Clara's habit of swallowing frustration until it exploded, both of them still learning how to be vulnerable without armor. It wasn't romantic or Instagram-worthy. It was hard and honest and necessary. That's marriage, Clara realized. Not the wedding with flowers in their garden that her mother had cried through, or the honeymoon in Scotland where they'd finally gotten to just be together without scrutiny. Marriage was these 2 a.m. conversations where you chose each other again, even when choosing felt difficult. The counseling Sophie had jokingly demanded turned out to be non-negotiable. They went every Thursday, sitting on an uncomfortable couch while Dr. Patricia Chen asked questions that made them both squirm. How do you handle conflict? What are your expectations around money, time, career priorities? When you're angry, do you withdraw or explode? You're both high-functioning individuals used to solving problems alone, Dr. Chen observed during one session. That served you well professionally, but it's a liability in partnership. You need to rewire how you approach challenges, together, not solo. It was humbling work, confronting the ways they were still selfish, still scared, still carrying baggage from before they found each other. But slowly they got better at it. Adrien learned to check in before making plans. Clara learned to voice frustration early instead of letting it fester. They created routines, Sunday morning coffee where they synced calendars, Friday night dinners with no work talk allowed, monthly check-ins about how they were actually doing beneath the surface. Work remained complicated. Clara had joined Hartley & Associates, a smaller but respected firm where her skills were valued on their own merit. But she couldn't escape being Adrien Whitmore's wife in every introduction, every client meeting, every industry event. Some people assumed she'd gotten the job through connections. Others were overly careful around her, afraid of offending someone with powerful relationships. "Does it bother you?" Sophie asked over lunch one day. They'd rebuilt their friendship after the chaos, and Sophie had become Clara's anchor through the transition. "Some days more than others," Clara admitted. "I want to be known for my work, not my marriage. But I also don't want to downplay my marriage to make other people comfortable. It's exhausting trying to prove myself constantly." "You know what I think," Sophie said. "Stop trying to prove anything. Just do excellent work and let that speak. The people who matter will see it. The rest will find something else to gossip about eventually." It was good advice, even if following it remained a daily choice. Clara threw herself into her projects, building her own reputation one successful client at a time. And slowly, grudgingly, the whispers quieted. Not completely, they never do, but enough that she could breathe. Meanwhile, Adrien was navigating his own recalibration. The board had implemented new policies around workplace relationships, transparency requirements that applied to everyone. Some employees who'd previously seen him as untouchable now viewed him as human, fallible, capable of mistakes, willing to admit them. It was disorienting and oddly liberating at once. "I spent so long being perfect," he told Clara one night, "that I forgot perfect isn't real. These past months being honest about struggling, about not having all the answers, it's made me a better leader. People trust me more now because I'm not pretending anymore." The real test came on their first anniversary. Clara had planned a quiet dinner at the restaurant where they'd had their first real date, the spot by the Thames where everything had changed. But that afternoon, digging through old photos for her anniversary slideshow, she found it. The original pajama photo, the accidental message that had started everything. She stared at it for a long time. That girl in the penguin pajamas felt like someone from another life, tired, lonely, playing it safe. And now here she was, married to a man who'd upended his world for her, building something real and messy and infinitely better than safety had ever been. That evening at dinner, after they'd laughed through memories and toasted to surviving year one, Clara pulled up the photo on her phone and slid it across the table. "Remember this?" Adrien looked at it and smiled, that genuine smile she'd fallen for. "How could I forget?" "Best mistake you ever made, was it though?" Clara asked. "A mistake, I mean. Maybe it was the universe pushing me toward something I was too scared to reach for on my own." "Philosophy at dessert?" Adrien teased, but his eyes were serious. "I don't know if I believe in fate or universe or any of that, but I believe we made choices. Scary, difficult, imperfect choices. And every day we keep choosing each other. That's not mistake or fate, that's commitment." Clara reached across the table, lacing her fingers with his. Around them, the restaurant hummed with other people's conversations, other people's moments. But in their corner by the window, with the Thames reflecting city lights and the weight of everything they'd built together, Clara felt something settle in her chest. This was her life. Complicated, occasionally frustrating, requiring constant work and communication and courage. Not a fairy tale ending where problems dissolved and everything became easy, but something better, something real. "I'd send you that photo again," Clara said softly, knowing everything that would come after. All the chaos and scrutiny and 2 a.m. fights. I'd choose it all over again. "Good," Adrien replied, squeezing her hand. "Because I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck with me, penguin pajamas and all." They left the restaurant hand in hand, walking the same path they'd walked that first night when everything was new and terrifying. Except now it was familiar and still a little terrifying, because that's what real love is. Choosing to be vulnerable with someone. Trusting they'll catch you when you fall, knowing you'll do the same for them. Clara's phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. "Happy anniversary. Still can't believe you accidentally married your boss. Best rom-com plot ever." Clara laughed and typed back, "Not a rom-com. More like a drama with comedic relief. But yeah, best accident of my life. Because that's the truth nobody tells you about happy endings. They're not neat or simple. They're messy and require work, and sometimes you fight about Singapore at 2 in the morning. But if you're lucky enough to find someone worth fighting with, someone who sees you in penguin pajamas and thinks you're remarkable, someone brave enough to choose authenticity over image, that's not an ending at all. That's just the beginning of everything that matters." So here's the thing about Clara and Adrien's story. It's not really about a pajama photo, is it? It's about courage. The courage to be seen as you truly are. Messy and imperfect and beautifully human. The courage to choose connection over comfort, authenticity over image, love over fear. Because in a world that constantly tells us to polish ourselves, to perform perfection, to hide anything that doesn't fit the carefully curated version we present to others, being real is revolutionary. Think about your own life for a second. How many walls have you built? How many versions of yourself do you perform depending on who's watching? At work, you're the consummate professional. With family, you play a role. On social media, you're the highlight reel. But who are you when nobody's watching? And more importantly, who would you be if you stopped hiding? Clara's accidental photo wasn't a mistake. It was a moment of unguarded truth in a world starving for authenticity. And Adrien's response wasn't about attraction, not really. It was about recognition. He saw someone willing to be vulnerable even accidentally, and it reminded him he was allowed to be human too. That's the real lesson here. The connections that matter most, the relationships that transform us, they don't happen when we're performing. They happen when we drop the mask and risk being seen. But here's what I want you to ask yourself. What are you protecting by playing it safe? What opportunities are you missing because you're too afraid of what people might think? Clara could have hidden after that photo, could have quit in embarrassment, could have let fear dictate her choices. Instead, she leaned into the discomfort and discovered something extraordinary on the other side. So what about you? Are you living authentically? Or are you performing a version of life that feels safe but leaves you empty? Are you building real connections or maintaining comfortable distance? Are you brave enough to send the metaphorical pajama photo? To show up as yourself, flaws and all, and trust that the right people will see your worth? Because here's the truth nobody wants to admit. Safety is overrated. Playing small keeps you comfortable, but it doesn't make you happy. Real life, the kind worth living, happens when you stop hiding and start showing up as exactly who you are. If Clara's story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own choices and compromises and the walls you've built, then do me a favor. Subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, because we share stories like this every week. Stories about real people making brave choices, about transformation and growth and the messy, beautiful process of becoming who you're meant to be. These aren't fairy tales. They're reminders that courage is possible, that change is available, that you're not alone in wanting something more. So take the risk. Send the pajama photo, metaphorically speaking. Be brave enough to be seen. Because the life you're protecting by playing it safe, it's not nearly as good as the one waiting for you on the other side of courage.